to this week's edition of Make a Monday Viz Review, and happy 1st of December. I hope everyone is getting into the festive spirit if you are celebrating Christmas. You'll see some hints of candlelight behind me and a very poorly lit room because I'm just into the coziness of it all right now. Let's get straight into it because we only have about 25 minutes if I want to watch the national anthem of the Germany game. So, heading over to Twitter, and this week is quite a solemn topic actually that Andy picked out, and it's about shootings in the US. And I believe it's school shootings, but the data probably has other shootings as well. And I'm going to just pick out a few different visits and give my feedback. Yep, school shootings is the topic. Okay, so this is by Jack. This looks slightly odd on my screen because I wonder if that's what it's meant to look like. I don't think so, because you see the image, but then you see how it actually looks on Tableau Public. So, Jack, that's probably the key feedback, is to have a look at Tableau Public if that's rendering how it's supposed to. So it looks like the 1469 is supposed to be in the middle of those dots. And I imagine that every single one of those gray circles is a person who has who has lost their lives. So it's almost 1,500 children in the US have been wounded in school shootings since 1970. Basically, a big number to convey a very important and very tragic and sad message. So I think from the image that I see on Twitter, that looks all good, but the version on Tableau Public looks strange. Then Kayla says feedback is welcome. So let's have a look at what she has created. School shooting incidents in the United States. I think the title could be a bit punchier. I think it's a very raw topic, and I'm not saying toy with people's emotions, but don't soften the blow, because as somebody who doesn't live in the US and hasn't grown up in the US, and I'm sure many people in the US agree, this is absolutely atrocious. The whole gun culture is something that I will never understand and never agree with. And I think if there is a topic where you can really punch the message into people's faces, this should be the one. I'm trying not to get angry, because like when Andy showed me the data, I thought, seriously, like basically almost every day there's shootings. It just doesn't compute for me, and it doesn't compute that everything it's just thoughts and prayers and nothing actually happens. Anyway, let's not get me all worked up. So I would try to make the title more impactful, because it's very so the subtitle or the description: a school shooting incident includes whenever a gun is brandished, fired, or a bullet hits school property for any reason, regardless. It sounds a bit like some sort of legal description. This is about children dying or being injured in the place where they should be learning and carefree. And I think this could do it more justice by saying some of that. So the color indicates the number of victims. Oops. So if it's darker. Cleveland Elementary School. So 35 people were wounded. Okay, 5 did not survive. 5 died, I think, is a lot clearer than did not survive. I think this is too gentle on your audience. And I don't say that lightly, because I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's not about using emotion lightly, but I think this is the one topic where you really can. And I think if you go through all this effort of analysis and building a viz, then by all means make it punchy. And look at the number. This is absolutely insane. I don't quite understand. So, okay, so every column is a year. So if we go, oh, it says hover for more information, but I can't. I don't know what this is. I don't know if this must be a Tableau Public issue, but I can't hover over the numbers, but I can hover. There's lines for the decades, and I can hover here. So it looks like 2022 has the longest column of incidents. And what I would say here, so I understand the approach to the storytelling. It's meant to be like a vertical layout that you scroll down and the story unfolds. I find the way it's laid out, at the bottom we have all these sentences with numbers and words. It's not enticing to read because it's all center aligned, but it feels like statistics being read out to me. I think there's a chance to make it more of a story or to bring it together with the viz. Now, I will say I'm looking at this on a laptop screen, so it's a smallish screen. I don't know how it would look on a big screen, but if the layout stays the same and doesn't change, then I think because people have to scroll a really long way through the actual visualization, I don't know if they would even see the stuff at the bottom because you're scrolling, and then you get to the bottom and it's just text. I think it's probably just I haven't read all the words, but formatting can help a lot here to lay this out slightly differently. And if you saw Andy's Watch Me Viz yesterday I think it was, maybe there's something in there around the way he finds inspiration on places like Pinterest, where as people who have not had design training, and I know he's one of them, it's good to look at how graphic designers lay out a page and how they structure information visually, because it just gives you a bit of a chance to, especially when you're telling a story like this, to pick elements up and just put them in a different place, format them slightly differently, and it can be very different. So that's my feedback there for Kayla. And thank you for participating. Okay, let me have a look. Just going to quickly check. I see there's people in the chat. Okay. Okay, so Kayla says the formatting, the text shows up as you scroll. And okay, so maybe I don't know what the issue is. Like I don't know what I'm doing wrong here with my browser that things look funny. This one also does. Oh, see, all these things look really messy. Let me just refresh. I really don't know. What is this? Can I, maybe if I go into full screen mode or something? No, it doesn't change anything. So I wonder if, that's a real shame, which is partly why, and we haven't really made this very clear now with this relaunch of Makeover Monday, but as a general recommendation, I would recommend always include a picture in your tweets, because aside from the links resulting in something like you see now, the previews just don't look nice. I mean, some of them, like this one we're looking at right now, I think there's actually a title. Maybe there isn't one, but sometimes stuff is cut off. So always include a picture and then include the link, and people can still find it. I can't really comment much on the interactive versions now because clearly there's something going on, and I have updated my Chrome, so I don't know what the issue is here, but this is basically how Tableau Public looks like for me. Isn't that great? So let's have a look, and I'm just going to use images now because then, oh god, what a mess. Reset. Okay. This is from Kenti. My first feedback is, what is this about? Number of shooter. There's also the asked, you must include the data source, and it's not included. Uh, I would recommend, and I say this in the nicest way, to start again and to focus on some of the key elements. So, looking at the age of the shooter, which I think is what it is at the bottom, is totally fine. But you need to explain what your viz is about. Um, it needs definitions. It needs to be defined what this is. Number of shooter. Is it really the number of shooters, i.e., the person causing the shooting, or is it the number of shootings? I don't know. But that needs to be clarified. The age, I wouldn't call it 10s and 20s. I would start with probably teens. I think it's like if somebody says people in their 10s, I literally think of a 10-year-old, and that is probably inaccurate. So make sure, especially, well, with any data set, but especially a data set with such an emotionally laden topic that is so important in 2022 and always has been, but hasn't been fixed, don't mess it up. Like this should not be online. This viz should not be online because I think it just does a complete disservice. And rather than producing things that are poor quality, it's better to not have it at all. So make sure to treat the topic with respect and to put enough thought and information in there to put something out that you can stand behind. Because when it's on the internet, who knows where it will go? And you don't want to have your name associated with something that might be perceived to be incorrect, misinformation, or whatever you didn't actually intend to do. So, then we have Rihan. He has included a photo, an image. So let me open that. Let me just have a quick look at the chat. I could try a different browser, but then I have to do all this resharing again. So, oh God. Yeah. Okay. Let me just try a different browser. Just going to stop sharing for a second. Give me a moment. Okay. Actually, I just need to quickly close something. Okay, I'm going to share. Oops, share. What do we have? Safari. Okay, the next viz is from Rihan. Worrying rise in shootings at school sports event in the US. Yeah, there's a worrying rise in shootings. I mean, they should never rise. They shouldn't even exist. But that aside, so the focus here is on the school sports event. I'd be just out of curiosity, I'd love to know why in particular school sports events. Like, is that a thing? Is it why have you picked those? It's not something you need to include in your viz, but I guess I'm surprised it's not about the overall school shootings because that's kind of already very poignant. So I wonder if there's something special about sports events that you wanted to highlight. And I think when you say worrying rise, it is a worrying rise, and it's very clear from the first chart that it's gone up significantly. But I wonder if you can make that more obvious. So if you say in the last 10 years, you've gone from, well, there was 1 in 2013, there were 9 in 2014, but now it's 53. So how, so if we go, so it's a depends on which year you use for comparison, but if we use 2014 in the 9 years, 9 per year, it's a almost 600% increase in school shootings, or six-fold increase, sorry, I think is the word, in shootings at, oh, sorry. Sorry, guys. I just saw that. I had to activate my screen share on top of sharing my screen. So here we are. Apologies for that. So this is the viz I've been talking about. So we have the line, and I was talking about the number nine shootings in 2014 up to 53. So that's a almost a six-fold increase. I wonder if you could call that out in the title, looking at the last decade, because it was pretty low and low, you know, well, pretty low numbers until 2009 when it kind of spiked for the first time. Then it went down again, and then it went up. So what's been going on? We know part of what's been going on, but what is that? So when you say worrying rise, I think it's a crazy dramatic, scary rise. But how can you express that maybe in a big number? So now what I don't understand is, oh, okay, so sport event is now one of the categories of the different types of events or time periods. I would make that a bit clearer that you are comparing sport events to the other bits of school life where shootings have happened. And maybe you could do that with color. So maybe all the other bars are a lighter shade of this red, or maybe they're like a gray or something. And yeah, I would see if you can make the sport event pop out more, because currently they're all competing for my attention. It's the longest bar, but I'm like sport event, morning class, evening, not a school day, lunch. Like, what am I looking at here? Because it just tells me it's looking at the incidents per time period. Also, the description about school shooting incidents at sport events, I think, should be at the top of that section, because that's what's explaining the reason for this chart to me. Yeah. Number of victims at sports events, event shootings by school level. I would repeat the word school on the left. So at first, when it says number of victims, I'm like, oh, the number is high, the number is middle. Oh, okay, so this is the school. So repeat that, the word school, so that we know high school, middle school. And again, explain to me what these numbers mean. So if you say, so here we're looking at the last 6 years. So maybe call that out as well in the middle, that you're just looking at 2017 to 2022 and why. And then in there say, in those last 6 years, however many. So we've got 215 victims. Sorry, in the last 6 years, there were 215 victims at school sports events shootings. Most of them, however that number is, 90% or so, were in high school. Like, put these into context to each other. I can see one is really a lot longer or bigger than the other, but what does that mean? I think explain it in words, especially because this kind of content or these visits have the potential to be seen by a lot of people because of the topic it is and because of you tweeting about this topic. So make sure that you're aiming at an audience who might not be in any way familiar with data visualization, with analysis, with how to read what seems to us basic charts. So explain it to them. The charts will then support your explanation. And for some people, they go straight to the charts. They're like, oh yeah, I can figure this all out. But don't underestimate the importance of words. So overall, okay, so I'm scrolling with 2 fingers, and as I scroll over the map zooms because that hasn't been disabled, but I would disable that, the zoom functionality, because now I'm like, what's going on? I press home and it fixes it. But yeah, so that's just a small thing. But overall, I would say it's a very large viz. It doesn't need to be that large. First, I would squish it, so I would make it narrower. You could have potentially this line chart, if you make it half as wide, and then the bar chart you could put right next to it. Saves you a ton of space. And I think because right now the sentences are really long, well, visually very long, and having more breaks in there so that stuff is a bit more compact makes it easier to read and just easier for people to get into it because they're not like, oh my God, I have to almost like move my head left to right to read across the screen. So I would just make this all more compact, and then you could, maybe put those other two charts next to each other. So, probably about half the size. Okay, and I'm just going to bring back the Twitter feed. And see what else we can do. Okay, here's Emily. Just jump back to the chat. Okay, Rihan, great to see that you have watched this. Oh, hang on, which browser am I in now? I think this is Safari. Yeah, great that you were on the chat and that you've seen the feedback session. So hopefully that's useful. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what you do with it. So let's have a look at Emily's. Annual US school shooter death. Okay. It's simple. Can't say anything against things being simple. A couple of comments. I know I keep going on about titles, but it is literally the first thing people see. It is the cover of your book. I actually find school shooter death, firstly, hard to say, as you probably have noticed, but also because of the words, like visually, there's school, which has two O's, the S and the H, and there's shooter, like they're very similar looking, and I'm like, what is going on here? I would change this. I personally wouldn't call it school shooter deaths. I would, call it death in school shootings or from school shootings, just to break it up a bit because it's like four nouns, a place name, but three nouns next to each other. It's just a bit of a mouthful, and I think it doesn't have the impact that we might want it to. Now, the other feedback is, so I think the area chart is fine, or whether you use a line chart or area chart. I don't understand the average line because the average looks so low when there's a worrying trend going on in the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years of these increases in deaths caused by school shooters. So firstly, I would just remove the average line because that already visually removes this low perception. And then if you want to keep this very simple and just highlight the numbers, maybe you could have a brief call out that just points to those two spikes in the most recent years and talks about it. Because I think this topic needs more than just a visualization of the numbers. I think it needs something. At least that's my hope. So there's that. Let me do one more. Okay. Oh, it looks like the K-12 school shooting database, they have reshared some of the visualizations. So that's great. Okay, I need to scroll down a bit. Oh, this is interesting. So this is Yusuki. Okay. Oh, yes, it's a very good point, Jen, that the title in the previous verse suggested it's the school shooter who dies, and that's right. It should be school shooting deaths, I guess. But again, I find that hard to say. So death in school shootings is maybe a bit easier, even if it's more words. I think that's totally okay. So Yusuki has created this viz. So we've got basically a highlight table, number of victims of school shootings in the US by situation. Again, I want more emotion in this. I think I know for those of us not in the US or those of us who've never been impacted by this, it might seem quite far removed. And when we see news about it, we're like, oh, here we go again. But it's not that simple. And I think there are so many people who, heavily impacted by it. So it warrants more. And I like to think that with other topics where we talk about death and suffering, we would give that a bit more credit. So I quite like the use of this visualization. The highlight. Ooh, I don't like this in tooltips because it always scares me when it first pops up, and I think it blocks far too much of the vis. So I'm not going to scroll or hover or do any of that. So, but I like the highlight table. I think it's very interesting to see the decades and some of those trends, I guess. Escalation of dispute is the most caused the most victims in school shootings, and to then see on the right how that's more of an issue in the last decades, at least if that's I'm interpreting that right, and then indiscriminate shooting. Again, yeah, I like the use of this highlight table. I think it can be squished up so these columns don't need to be so wide because none of the numbers are longer than 3 digits, thank God. They can be pushed together a bit. Yeah, I like the use. I think the title needs to be there needs to be more of an introduction to this topic, especially because we're talking about like a school setting. And when I read these situations, those descriptions, it's really harrowing. So, I mean, good on everyone who's been working with this data because I'm sure it's not that easy unless you try and really detach yourself from it and just focus on the data, which is also totally understandable. But I like the use of this. I think it just the one key thing I would change is the title and making it a bit more clear, a bit clearer what this is about. And maybe so apparently there's a description. So maybe the two biggest ones who are by far the most or the causes for the most number of victims, maybe those could be actually called out without the hovering. So maybe there could be a short introduction under the title that talks about escalation of dispute and indiscriminate shootings and how that has potentially increased. And the shocking thing is when we look at the number for the 2020s, we're like, oh, it's lower than the 2010s. But we're only 3 years into it. So I hope well, no, it will go up. Let's be honest, but that's another thing that could be talked about, right? Because here we see every decade very neatly contained with the total number for those different categories or those situations. But where are we heading? Where are we heading in this decade? So with that, I'm going to close it out. I'm going to finish up, and I really appreciate everyone who tunes in live, who comments in the chat. I can't always interact with the chat because I'm just on a single screen flipping back and forth, but I really like doing these. Next week, I might have just skipped. I'll ask Andy if he can do this review because I'm going to be in Tel Aviv for a work event from Tuesday through to Thursday, so there's just no capacity for me to do this. But either there's none or it's going to be Andy. And thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you have a good rest of the week. Take care, stay safe, and enjoy December.